Welcome to On Point. Today's conversation is one that I've been really looking forward to because my guest today has done something that is fairly unique in the industry, where he has been the leader of both the commercial side of our organizations and of medical affairs. So Dr. Craig Granowitz started as a sales rep, spending 15 years in sales and marketing, and then building a business as a GM, and then has also been the CMO of multiple organizations. And almost nobody has been in every single one of those seats. And so in a world where we're talking about collaboration and about impact and about measurement, this is a really unique point of view that I think all of you will really enjoy.
Welcome to On Point, the medical excellence podcast where we talk to pharma leaders about how to build highly effective medical affairs organizations.
So, Craig, welcome and thank you for being here.
Scott, I'm so appreciative of your including me and inviting me to do this. And my goal is to really share experience where they can be helpful to those who are medical affairs professionals and bring perhaps a different perspective to your listenership.
Well, given that this story today and what we're going to get to talk about is looking at medical affairs from multiple perspectives, I think it would be really helpful to walk our audience through that career path that you've had. And just tell us, how did you get started?
I majored in biochemistry and had a minor in economics and spent 2 years working for a biotech company for the VP of sales and marketing for that company. And then when I was at Columbia during my Ph.D. work, I spent 3 years working for Pfizer in the medical organization, cleaning up clinical trials on an ED infective that's been on the market a number of years. So I was always interested in the technology and in medical development and in medicine in general. But I felt that I could be most interested in make the biggest contribution on the commercial side of bringing that innovation to as many people as possible. So in that regard, this was a logical extension for me to start in the commercial organization, because at the end of the day, if you can't get somebody to use your product, then what good, no matter how great science is, can't be brought to patients. It's not going to do them any good. And my career just developed from there.
That's amazing. So tell me about kind of that early step. I think that you don't always hear folks talking about sales as an opportunity to have patients get exposure and opportunity to get you treated. So tell me a little bit about kind of what that was like as a sales rep and kind of that part of your career.
Yeah, it was probably one of the most important parts of my career, because you really learn along a number of different domains. First and most importantly, everything everybody does in life is on some level or another selling yourself. And what I mean by sale is everything we do, whether we're a parent or a coworker or a family member, is you're trying to convey an idea to someone to get how they think about whatever their reality is and move it to something new. So in that regard, there is a change of ideas. So you need to understand your target, whoever that might be, whether it's a KOL or whether it's a prescriber or whether it's the front desk person when you're trying to get past them to talk to the doctor. Ideally, communication requires engagement. Engagement requires that person feels that you are in touch with them, so they want to actually listen to you. If someone's not engaged to listen, you're never going to even be able to get through the front door, figuratively and literally, to get them to even think about what you're saying to them. And in that regard, being a sales rep, doing that 10 times a day for people that are really not particularly interested in what you have to say per se, was incredibly important, not only of how I frame myself, but how I want to think about those people I'm talking to, and always projecting myself into their point of view to be as effective as I can at what my mission is.
So tell me, because I've never been in that role, and a lot of folks that listen have never been in that role. What was like one of your biggest lessons? Like, do you have a story? Do you have something to share? Like, this was really hard and it stuck with you.
Well, the funniest again, this is decades ago, but I'll never forget the first detail I ever did. So here I am, I'm a fresh MD Ph.D. out of Columbia, and I'm sitting in a parking lot in Hoboken, New Jersey, going into some specialty pharmacy to talk to some, you know, infusion pharmacist. And I was just terrified. I was sweating bullets and thinking I'm going to fail and this person's going to think I'm a fool. And, when you look back on it, that person probably didn't even remember that at the beginning of the time I was in the room with them, but I will never forget that, even though it's, more than 30 years ago. So I think the whole idea with the takeaway to me is you got to be comfortable and confident in who you are and believe in what you're saying. And equally, you've got to take an interest in the other person as a human being, not in an object through which I'm trying to project some sort of change in behavior. And that was probably the most important lesson. I think the second most important lesson is don't take anything personally. Another funny story is I'll never forget going into our office, my little suit on, and my bag's full of samples and all that stuff. The sales rep carried.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the front desk, and there was this incredibly bored receptionist sitting there, chewing gum, and looking really bored, and was clearly not having a good day. And I was going to be the dog that she was going to kick that day. And I remember trying to say to her, I'm here to see Dr. So-and-so. And it was one of those old-fashioned desks where, there's that glass slide. And she's looking me right in the eye, and she puts her finger up on the glass and slowly closes it in my face while I'm talking. And so I'll never forget that lesson because, again, one of those things is it was clearly designed to be a demonstration of power. And clearly someone who's in a difficult position and feeling that she needed to project power because she was feeling powerless that day. And, again, that was an important lesson. It had nothing to do with me.
Sure.
And I think the whole idea of when you have people that treat you a certain way that you don't feel is appropriate or with respect, that's on them, not on you. And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us, particularly for MSLs that are out in the field and a lot of times still that, they're not treated fairly or with the due respect and dignity of their role as a medical professional. And my only words of wisdom there is, that had nothing to do with you, and don't let that person have that power over you. You have autonomy, you have value, and don't ever forget that.
Love that. So tell me a little bit more about the transition. So you started off as a sales rep here, and then you went into marketing before medical affairs. Walk us through how you got through the commercial organization and made the decision to move into medical affairs.
Yeah, it's a long story which evolved over about 15 years. I started in sales. I've been in this rotation program with all MBAs but me. I was like the odd duck out. I was this MD, PhD, and with this sort of management training program, which were in the vogue at that period of time. And Schering-Plough had one of these programs. So I spent almost a year as a sales rep. Had two different sales territories. I was selling oncology and hepatitis products. And one of the products was alpha interferon, which at that time was just being studied for the first therapy for hepatitis C, and as well as some oncology products. And then I moved into marketing, and I had the opportunity to launch alpha interferon for adjuvant melanoma, which was the first and only high-risk adjuvant melanoma care. So I did that launch. And again, this was when I was at Schering-Plough many years ago, and it was a great launch. It was very successful. Over the first year, we did over $150 million in the U.S., which at that period of time was a really significant launch, especially for a unusual biologic for treating a disease that is pretty narrow in its distribution. And I went from there and moved up into as a marketing director, and it was sort of where was I going to go the next step. And during that time, I got to know some people at a venture capital fund, and I was always interested in VC at that time as well. And I had the chance, I left Schering for about 3 years and worked in VC. or a venture capital fund that did mostly early stage investing. And I became a principal on two of the funds the company was working on. One was sourcing technology from university, very early stage, with the limited partners being a bunch of big pharmaceutical companies that had put in a pool of capital, and the ideas that came in they could draw from that pool. And so it's sort of seed-based financing. And one of the companies that came out of that was a pharmaceutical development finance company. It was actually very, very early. I was really one of the first of this kind. And we got the company up to the proof of concept stage, and then one of the major investors at the last minute backed out. And at that point, I'd been there about 2.5, 3 years. And the question was, was I going to go back to the VC fund and sort of become a partner in a venture capital firm, or what was I going to do? There's a company I'd sort of seconded to, unfortunately came to an end, which is, again, another great story of adversity and overcoming adversity for another day, perhaps. But I stayed in contact, very close contact with the head of commercial and globally at Schering at that time. And he kept wanting me to come back. So I went back as a director. And as opposed to being on the U.S. sales and marketing side, I was now on the global side as a director and oversaw the interferon business there. In fact, the CEO just recently stepped down from one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies with one of my marketing managers at that time. But again, that's a story for another day. And did that for a number of years, developed that interferon business outside the U.S., really learned to work with all of the international markets around the world, learned the whole drug development process, and really learned the idea of working in a shared accountability model of operating.
Okay.
So as opposed to being in a U.S. market, which was you had a president of the division, and you work in marketing or sales, and it was a very hierarchical structure. Schering at that time on the global business worked really much on a shared accountability model with a series of regional presidents and then a global marketing team, and then ultimately two different presidents and international president. You had a U.S. president.
Sure.
You had a head of R&D, and I was involved really working with all of them at a senior level, as well as all the country operations
Yeah.
that I was working with. Their marketing, generally their what I would call their marketing directors, who also had a sales team in each of the major countries. So it was a great learning experience. And I did that for several years, developed that business, learned how to develop drugs, learned how to do a lot of life cycle management. And then I went back to the U.S. as the VP of marketing a number of years later. And then ultimately became the VP of sales and marketing. And I really grew that hepatitis business in the U.S. to ultimately about a $2.5 billion business with a sales force of a few hundred people. And we really did a number of pretty important innovations in hepatitis C, developing interferon and interferon ribavirin and pegylated interferon, and ribavirin, really drove that innovation engine and set the stage ultimately for the small molecule inhibitors, which, the way things go is Schering had put in the investments that were necessary, and then that market went to Gilead, which did an awesome job developing that and turned hepatitis C into a curable disease. I mean, it's a great industry success story.
Yeah.
And while we had a tremendous amount of success, again, that's another thing that I learned is how do you judge success? Because I judge success of bringing innovation to patients. Ideally, I'd like to be able to want to do it in my company, be the economic beneficiary. But
Yeah.
what's most important to me is, as a human being and someone who works in the industry and ultimately as a doctor and researcher, seeing drugs come to market that benefit patients, whether they're mine or not, at the end of the day is the most important thing. And it's a real highlight in my career of seeing two diseases largely be transformed. One was CML, and interferon was approved for CML, was really the only therapy before Gleevec. And I was thrilled that basically our interferon business got annihilated and replaced with Gleevec, but you turned that lethal disease into a curable disease, and the same thing with Hep C. So, while my company made money, we played a really important part on the journey. I think you have to frame how do you characterize success? And to me, success is helping as many people as possible improve their lives. And I'm not going to have the only solution because there's always going to be future innovation. And I think we should all take pride in that too.
I love that. So tell us a little bit about then making this decision and the opportunity to then move from commercial marketing, leading such a large organization, having financial responsibility for a large part of the organization. Tell us a little bit about when and how you made this switch into medical affairs.
Yeah, it's a great question. In like so many things in life, you sort of have a bunch of preparatory things, and then you have a trigger that you finally make a decision to make a move. Schering had undergone a significant management change, or a new CEO, new president. My boss at the time was really one of the best bosses I've ever had. Learned a lot from her, and I'll just give her names because it's all positive, and she is so terrific. It was Carrie Cox, who was running global pharmaceuticals. Fred Hassan was CEO at Schering, and Carrie was my boss running that business unit. And she and I had been talking along a lot about life cycle management of products, because so much of what I worked on, both my line responsibility, which was the interferon and oncology business for Schering, but then also overseeing the broader that whole therapy area. And we had Remicade at the time. Schering had all the international rights to Remicade. This was before J&J did their buyout, even after J&J did their buyout. And a lot of the life cycle that was done on Remicade with all the other indications, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease and everything, was also, I played a major role in that. It was part of the development team, both at Schering and also the joint. So I had as much experience as anybody on life cycle management. And the company at that time was struggling with how to do medical affairs better, particularly life cycle management. And there was a great collaboration between R&D and commercial at Schering at the time. Really, really strong, and a really positive and productive one. And so it was really an equal partnership between commercial and clinical development, and the head of R&D and my boss, Carrie, was the president of pharmaceutical. At that time, Schering also acquired a company called Organon, and we were looking for opportunities for senior Organon executives to take senior commercial roles at Schering. It was kind of a confluence of things. I'd been running that business a long time, and I thought it was better if someone else took it over. I kind of felt like my good ideas were gone, and with probably time for someone else smarter and fresher that can take it over. We had the need to create an opportunity for a senior executive at Organon, and there was a very capable guy. And there was also a need at Schering to really revamp its medical affairs, which really wasn't functioning very effectively for lots of reasons, which aren't very important. So I made the move. And it was a lateral. I was still working for Carrie, and as opposed to being a line manager, I was really very much the center of being a cross-functional partner for all the commercial heads and the head of R&D. So it was I guess in one respect, it was, from a career development standpoint, if I wanted to be a CEO, probably a dumb decision, because one of the lessons I learned early on was, take the P&L out of my cold, dead hands, right? P&L under the big organizations are the ones that wield all the power. But for me, I was much more always interested in what was interesting. And I thought this was interesting, could make a big difference and do something that was important to the company. And my boss asked me to do it, and had a lot of respect for her. And so I went and did it, and really restructured the entire global medical affairs organization at Schering, which at that time, again, I had shared responsibility for all the field-based medical people in all the countries worldwide, which was probably about 500, I would say, thereabouts, and shared the P&L with all of the country and ultimately regional presidents for all of the lifecycle management and medical communications, medical information. and then worked very closely with R&D as well on all late-stage lifecycle management, had input into the early pipeline as well, and was sort of the key point of contact for the commercial organization with the medical organization, the clinical development and R&D organization, and was the key point of contact from the medical organization to the country operations and all the regional presidents. And I really enjoyed that role at Schering. It was just a great work environment, really high level of trust, really a lot of fun, very effective. We did a lot. And I had that role for, I guess it was about 3 years, maybe, and then 3-4 years. And then Merck acquired Schering-Plough. And so that was then the next turn in the road of Merck didn't have a medical affairs organization, and they really liked what we were doing. And they asked if I would stay to create it. And so I did that for about 5 or 6 years and really try to leverage the same concept and processes into Merck as I did at Schering, because that was what my management wanted me to do at the time. So that was a transition, but there was a huge change because there was no medical affairs organization. All the medical people reported to R&D. And so that was, was moving over 1,000 people out of R&D into now the commercial organization, and then grafting on all these other functions. And then all of the processes that had to go along with it. And in most countries, it worked really, really well. The U.S., for lots of reasons, was a far bigger, longer challenge, from some of which were mindset, some of which were legal, regulatory, and some of which, as always in a big organization, were personality.
Right.
But that ultimately was, I think we had close to 2,000 people in medical affairs worldwide. And it was the same concept. All the medical people reported through country medical directors that had a dual reporting to the country GM and to me, or through my management, depending upon how large the country size was. And it worked great. It really worked really, really well for a long period of time until there was a change in R&D management, and then with different people come different ideas.
Yep.
But it was really, really, I think, made a big difference to the organization, and I hope we brought value to the company and value to our customers.
That's great. We're going to circle back to some of the things that you did and some of the lessons that you learned. But just for everybody, after that experience, you stayed in medical affairs. So maybe just tell us kind of where you are now, where you got to, and then we're going to go back and string together kind of what you've learned and what you've done with it.
Yeah, so then I was at Schering for about 6 years. There was a change in strategy with a change in the head of R&D, and I thought I did what I could do, and it was time for a change. And I had the opportunity to become the chief medical officer at a biotech company. And I went there really for 2 reasons. The first is the company was called, it was and is called Amarin Pharmaceuticals. And Amarin had won a really important free speech First Amendment case in the court system. And Amarin at that time was the first and probably still the only company that whose promotional communication wasn't guided by the FDA. It was really guided by the federal courts as per the judgment in this case. And, it's a very narrow case, but I thought it was going to be a first and unique situation that no one might ever have again. It demonstrated that we could be good players and good citizens as an industry and self-regulate, and that we didn't need the FDA reviewing all of our materials to give fair, balanced information. And I thought that was a really cool opportunity to show the best side of what the industry was. And in that regard, we never got a complaint from anybody. Never from a customer, never from a competitor, never from the FDA on any of the claims we ever made during that entire period of time that we operated under that very unique set of circumstances of, since the FDA now regulating all of our promotional material. So that, to me, again, was a really unique and important opportunity, I think, for our team, but also in the industry, to say we can be responsible. We can do this the right way, overseeing our own activity. We had very distinct set of processes. We're really rigorous how we reviewed the literature and were claimed so accurate and balanced, and we made annual reports to the government on it. And the guy who was the head of medical information and communications at the time was really outstanding and was incredibly scrupulous and careful in that, as was the head of regulatory. But it was a really great experience. And the second thing we did was very much involved in getting, because I had safety and a number of the other medical functions, even on that clinical development at the time, got a study called Reduce It through completed, published in the New England Journal, and then approved in the FDA of icosapent for reducing cardiovascular death, stroke, and MI, approved by the FDA, which is really an extraordinary and completely unexpected finding. And again, it was one of those situations where the stock went from $1 to 13 to 23 in about a month. That was unbelievable.
Yeah.
It was an amazing journey, and did that for a number of years. The whole long story about losing the patent and trying to do additional things with the company, and thought that there were other places where I could make a difference. And I came to my current employer, as chief medical officer at Lexicon Pharmaceuticals, about 4.5 years ago, and really to develop that pipeline based on a very innovative discovery engine, based on a concept of knocking out the gene of every single 5,000 overlapping coding genes between mouse and human, developing 5,000 strains of mice, phenotyping those mice, and then identifying about 200 targets of interest, of which a number of which we have developed to drugs we've either licensed or brought to market and commercialized. So again, a very different experience, but a really cool one too.
Amazing. What an amazing journey, amazing story. And, I think one of the areas that I get a lot of questions about, which I think you're in a very unique position to comment on, is what is the role and the impact that medical affairs should be having within our organizations? And so whether you look at it from the perspective of, you were the head of a commercial organization and you had partnership with medical affairs, to taking one over to building one from scratch. How do you, when you walk into a medical affairs organization and say, here's why we're here, where do you start?
Well, the first and most important thing, so I built 4 U.S. medical affairs teams at 4 totally different companies in 4 very different stages of development, as well as 3 global teams. I've built a global commercial organization at Schering, and I built a global commercial organization at Merck, and frankly, we built one at Amarin too, because we launched in Europe. First and most important thing is aligning at the corporate level of what are the objectives for this organization. So it's a very different set of drivers of value than either a sales and marketing organization, which is to drive revenue and ultimately be the engine of revenue that leads to a profitable enterprise, or R&D that has a very clear mission of, depending upon if it's a fully integrated discovery and development engine, either coming up with novel targets and specific molecules to those targets, and then developing them and getting them approved within an optimal label that would maximize value, however the payer and prescribers see value. But medical is the connector. And so in that regard, it's extraordinarily important to understand what is the role of that. And it's much more ambiguous, but also flexible, because it's whatever you want it to be as a connector between the revenue driver and the new molecule approver. But it's everything in between. I sort of feel like it is the organization that shapes the vibe of the molecule, and it sets the precondition for what is going to be the brand overall gestalt, both from a scientific side, and then it is a reflection of the company's organizational philosophy and structure, the data, and the way that you tell the story. So it really provides the background music for what a brand will be. And in that regard, while on one hand it's ambiguous of what it is, it's fundamental because it is that ultimate customer interface with your most important customers, always in collaboration with another partner.
Yeah.
So in the ideal organization, you're that partner to development going to health authorities. You're the partner to all of your government officials, particularly outside the US, of getting pricing access and reimbursement. And you're the partner to the commercial organization going to major purchasers and prescribers and patient group. So, you are setting a consistent vibe in the ideal sense across all of those audiences
Sure.
and also being the interpreter between all of those different stakeholders, both internal and external. That to me is the ideal of what you want that to be. Now, it's very hard to quantify that in certain respects. It's not like being a sales and marketing person.
Right.
Here's my revenue, here's my cost, here's my
Yeah.
your profit or loss. Or on R&D, and I got this many drugs approved. But the success of an organization is largely dictated by what is the environment, the context that you create and then execute against with all of those stakeholders, both internally and externally, have an optimally functioning and then optimally successful asset.
So, correct. I mean, you've been the P&L holder of an organization that you would have had to invest in a medical affairs organization, and you are leading medical affairs organizations that your companies have invested in. How do you know if it was a good investment?
At the end of the day, there's sort of the internal and the external. Being in medical affairs, you have to be comfortable always being a partner. And so in an organization that says, I want to be the sole leader, that's not the right mindset to bring to the game. It's interesting being in biotech and having to raise lots of capital and talking to investors all the time and doing quarterly earnings calls for 10 years, and having raised over $1 billion of equity from multiple companies in multiple periods of time. I see both the vision as the chief medical officer developing the drugs, having the medical affairs organization, and then also being the one that has to go back to shareholders and boards to justify what we do. At the end of the day, my success is your organization's success. Again, how the organization defines success. Whether that being a large pharmaceutical company and I want to have growth of 6% of revenue and double-digit profit growth year on year, or whether it's a biotech company saying I want to get this drug approved and we'll get an exit, or I want to hit a certain milestone, or I want to form a certain partnership. My organization has to be a partner and an enabler for any one of those. But the goals are, what are the organization's goals? And then my goals have to be attuned to what the organization believes are the success criteria that you establish at the management level, whatever they may be. So I'm sorry if that is a bit
That
vague,
makes sense.
but that is how you have to judge success.
Yeah. So you have had the opportunity to build medical affairs teams from scratch and to step in. Um, you go through the process of finding out what the company's goals are and you align your goals to it. If you were going to look at a medical affairs function and say, this organization is capable, ready, able to be successful, what are the things you're looking for? What does a great medical affairs team look like so that it can adapt and hit those goals?
Yeah, I look at 3 criteria of a really healthy any organization, but particularly a medical organization. And we can talk about some difference between commercial
Mhm.
field-based people, customer-facing people, and medical customer-facing people. But, I sort of look at it as curiosity, tenacity, and courage. Those to me are the 3 attributes, both individually and organizationally. Organizationally, then it's also teamwork, humility on top of it. But, from a personal and an internal organizational standpoint, the most important thing of any medical person is curiosity. If you're not curious, like you really want to know stuff, you're not going to be successful because you got to really want to know how things work, why they work. And you got to be genuine in that. Because if you're genuine in that, everyone around you picks up that energy. If you don't really care, if you're not really that curious, especially when you're in an influence role like a field-based medical person, if you're not passionate and excited genuinely, you cannot be successful. I sort of feel that curiosity, but I love to learn and want to apply that to help others learn, that in genuine and true and selfless, that's the single most important thing I look for. And I try to articulate that myself. And again, it's constant self-improvement process, right? But that's the first one. If you have curiosity, the other two come out of that.
Okay.
Right. So if you are curious, you will be courageous, which in my mind means you'll speak up. You will ask questions because you'll want to know. And it's not fake that, I want to speak up because I want to be seen and heard. You speak up because, I really want to know. And if you're sitting in front of, a KOL and you might have a little trepidation, this person's a KOL and I'm not a KOL. Ideally, they want to learn as much as you want to learn. That is a shared human interest that cuts across no matter if you're the university president or you're a first-year medical student or whatever. That is universal, and people pick up and see that when it's genuine.
Yeah.
So if you have curiosity, you will be courageous. You'll also be tenacious. It's like, I really want to know.
Right.
So you'll keep driving at it and to try to get that goal of what you want. And that leads over to everything you do. So to me, it's curiosity, it's tenacity, and it's courage from the personal standpoint. Organizationally, being in medical, like being any good partner, you got to have humility, and you really want to work with your partners and not have to be taking credit for everything. And again, it's very hard for any of us because, we want to be successful and we want to be seen and heard and valued. But those are what I would call the key attribute.
So if you were to walk into an organization and observe and listen and ask questions, what would you be listening for? What would you see? And what would opportunities and challenges look like versus what you just described?
So the first thing I would do is I'd walk into a cross-functional meeting or a bunch of cross-functional meetings and look for consistency and harmony.
Okay. What about that look like? What do you mean?
So that means everybody's working together. So whether you're in a promotional review meeting, you got marketing, you got regulatory, you got medical, are those productive, harmonious meetings where people genuinely respect each other and want to be together and want to really focus on doing a high quality job? Or dealing with the R&D organization and sitting in a life cycle meeting? Is medical sitting at that meeting? Are they having an equal seat at the table? Do people feel like they're valued and heard? And it's the same thing with the commercial organization. And I would look up how much of this is, I can't talk to this person or that person because of organizational restrictions of limitations or not. Are you driven by guidelines and rules, or are you driven by principles? So I think I would look at each one of those pockets, and then at the executive team, the head of R&D and the head of medical and the head of medical affairs and the commercial leader, as well as legal and compliance, they all work together effectively. So you look for tone and productivity of engagement. If you do that, you always have a shot to be successful because you're actually leveraging then each of the skills of each of the area in a highly effective way. And I think medical ideally plays a critical role in that. because it's sitting in all of those roles, unlike any other function.
Right.
And, I don't want to draw a diagram that you're like in the middle and all the others are hub within everyone says, oh, the greatest thing on the universe. And I've never really come with a great or pictorial of that, or like the foundation everybody sits on it. I don't know, but you're sort of the glue that holds it all together. Maybe that's the best way to think about it. You're not the center. You're not floorboards, but you're the common glue, in organizations that are affected. And I see that even in a CMO role is, the CEO and I talk to more functions than any other. Um, and, internally, I probably talk to as many or more functions. And one of the things I love about being a CMO at a small company is I get to be involved in the details and empower a lot of people across a lot of different functions. But unlike being in a large organization where you might be 5 levels away from that customer interface, I'm like right there. I mean, yesterday I was at a KOL with my head of clinical development talking to a doctor I'd never met before in a therapy area that was thinking about filing an IND in,
Yep.
and I get to do that.
Yeah.
So that is what personally satisfying.
So I guess the question is, you go into a team and you have those aspirations and you start to see that the team is working effectively together, that they're at the table, they're having a conversation, they understand the commercial goals of the organization and what medical affairs can do to support it. The question always then comes up, like, how do you measure and communicate that, within the organization? What does your CEO care about? What do you as the CMO care about that you can communicate?
Yeah, it's a balance. So the first and most important thing is you got to establish the right environment, working relationships, principles of respect. The problem in that often then is you create an organization that people just like hanging out. And they're not then being objective around what are the company goals. So then you have to have this careful balance of the overlay of setting pretty aspirational goals, but are achievable. So you then create a tension in the organization because then you're under pressure, and whether that pressure is time or money, you then stress the system. So how do you keep the harmony while stressing the system with putting specific goals and objectives in without then blowing up the harmony you've created and everyone reflexively going back to the camps and pointing fingers that it's not my fault that we failed, right? And that is, in my current job, a lot of the balance that I'm responsible for. And then it is that dynamic tension of create the trust and the environment of productive communication, but then stress it with pretty audacious goals that are going to stress that harmony when stuff doesn't happen to your expectation, which is every single time that you then don't have a train wreck. That's the challenge.
So tell us how you do that. What are some things that, if you look back at your calendar and how you spend your time in your day, right? Because every organization that is doing anything of substance puts that pressure you talked about in the system on purpose, right? Like we set goals, we set objectives, we set timelines, we have constraints on purpose. How do you spend your time to make sure that the organization rises to that versus crumbles underneath it?
My job, I think ideally, and again, this is at a very high level, not subject matter expertise, is really all about organizational interface.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of my time calibrating between coaching and pushing. And I've got to calibrate that all the time because I've got a lot of different functional area. I've got bios. I basically have everything in R&D, other than, early stage discovery. But those are all really, really different personalities in terms of language, type of person that's interested in it. And so how do you create that working team? And then how do I graft that within the larger organization to achieve our goals? Knowing that when there are those setbacks, we are also adaptable, that we constantly look for the positive and keep the program on track, even when there were hurdles where it would be really easy to either give up or it become really contentious. And every day and every interaction is trying to calibrate that. I mean, I've had tons of things that have been setbacks, some which have been successful and some haven't. But for example, I'm working on a refiling of an NDA now. That there have been 2 CRLs and it's a 7-year journey. And I've got a board that is really interested in continuing to pursue this. And there was eventually no path forward, and we were able to find a path forward. But it was only because we kept looking for ways to solve it and kept collaborating with all the different stakeholders, both internally and externally, to find a way, then align everyone around something that was given up for dead, completely dead, and find a way to resurrect that and hopefully finally get it over the finish line. But I'm in a continuous calibration, whether it's myself as the CEO, whether it's with our board, and particularly our board chairman, whether it's with the FDA, whether it's with the study group. It's an independent, large, cooperative study group, getting them to think about using their trial in a way that they never thought about. Getting all of those stakeholders aligned and then recalibrating constantly if there are things that are unexpectedly good, some of that has happened, and things that have been unexpected delays. And how do you keep everything on track on that? That's what I spend almost all my day doing. And the other is really spending a lot of my time managing, at this point, investors and potential investors and existing investors, on telling a narrative of bringing capital into the company and building that story too, and being a storyteller there.
And what's the biggest obstacle that you face every day doing this?
That I will fail to find a good solution that keeps the process on track. I have to be, in my own view, a constant source of hope and solution. That's really what I see a lot of my role. And then translating that spark of that idea, that spark of hope, into a workable plan that is then implementable within timelines, risk, and money.
Okay.
So my concurrent is, I wake up every day and say, what if I can't solve this problem?
So how do you bring your organization, because you've got a good team. I've met several of them now. How do you bring an organization together to help do that, to help overcome and solve these problems?
Scott, that's a great question. And I think that's one learned through decades of trial and error, mostly error. And I apologize to any person I ever worked with who I didn't true with the optimal dignity and respect. I really mean that, because you learn a lot, and you learn a lot by not doing the right things, and I know I made tons and tons of mistakes, and so much I'm sure, and I know that we're taken personally by people, and, I think that is unfortunate. I think, again, it's always trying to understand the individual who you're talking to, and as much as they're willing to share about their entire person, who are they? And again, you want to be respectful of boundaries, but the more that you can understand the context of their work life and their total life, I think the better you can relate and connect with them. That gets them the greatest satisfaction for them as a person. And then how does their work persona enhance their entire overall quality of life and self worth. And I don't want to overinflate that, but truly, that's how you get the most out of people.
Yeah. I think this whole concept of work-life balance is false. It's more of integration. You only have one life, then uh, how you show up at work impacts how you show up at home and vice versa.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought a lot about this. Pretty religious person and study and everything every day. And um, I think in our corporate lives, we're judged based on milestones and goals. But really, as we're judged in our communities and as individuals, we're judged not by necessarily what we accomplished, but by how we accomplished it. Right. So it's the whole idea of, what would you want your obituary to read versus, what you want your accountant to say at the end of your life. And in essence, what you accumulate or what particular goals you've had, if you get there only by leaving bodies all over the place, um, you're not going to be probably a very happy person. You got lots of money and lots of titles and lots of awards. Um, and the question is that really how you want to live your life? I don't want to go too philosophical,
Yeah.
but I think if you can focus on the process and the engagement with each individual, then they will deliver results for themselves and for the organization. And it doesn't matter about delivering it for me. I mean, for me I did that for decades to be the hard guy and say, you got to do this and you didn't do this. And I mean, one of the reasons I just couldn't stand working at big companies anymore is doing the annual review and focusing on what they didn't do right. It's just like, come on, can we just like try to build people up and focus on what they didn't do, but focus on what they did do and how they did it. And being in a small organization, I think you can integrate that, or at least I found I've been able to integrate that much better. But the way that you get really the most out of people is you give them the most and let them be themselves.
Love that. Great. Let's talk about one last topic. Uh, our industry, the world and our industry and medical affairs are changing pretty rapidly. New technologies, higher expectations, the speed in which investors and companies are expecting things to occur seem to be going a lot faster. For you and yourself, what are you focused on for your own personal development to remain the leader that you want to be within the organization?
That's a complicated philosophical question, like so many things. It's relevancy. And I think in the era of AI, the more human you are, the better off you're going to be. I always use that analogy of, John Henry against the steam engine, right? That whole thing. You're never going to beat the steam engine, right? I'm not going to beat AI of having this vast amount of knowledge. But if I'm the guy running the steam engine, I'm going to become even more effective and have a whole lot more fun. So I think to be successful in the world today and going forward, you have to touch the real world in some way, because AI doesn't touch the world. It doesn't touch people. It doesn't touch things. That's why anything that interacts with the real world is going to be relatively AI proof. If you work in this entire virtual environment and your activities are routinized in process or content in their entirety, you're going to be at far more risk. But if you're touching people and that human interface is what's going to set us apart. And I think that also makes for a much more fulfilling work environment.
Yeah.
And so to me, the more human I can be as time goes on, worry less about the facts, the details, which again, in earlier times when I started my career, he who had all the facts was generally the one that was driving the decision.
Right.
Everyone can sit there at a meeting. Now, and query Siri and get the answer.
Right.
So more and more, it's not the answer that matters. It's the answer that's relevant and achievable, which is human, because we work in human organizations with human beings, especially in healthcare.
Absolutely. Yeah. Going back to something you were talking about earlier, like AI doesn't care if patients get better, right? AI doesn't care if we close a care gap.
I think I hear that all the time. I think it's the wrong framing of the issue. It just doesn't matter. I think it's different than doesn't care. Doesn't care sort of means it's a negative. Like it is alien.
Right.
Just like the way AI operates is alien to us, we're alien to it. It's not a matter of it doesn't care, because caring then is it's a negative, right? It doesn't care means it's sort of a negative. Maybe that's just my way of viewing that word. It's irrelevant. It just can't even conceive of it. And I think that's the difference. It's not that it doesn't care. It just cannot conceive of what that would be. And I think that to me that's what makes us human, is we have that sensitivity. It's innate.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it goes back to birth. Why is there this bond between a baby and a parent? It's this innate humanity. And that is not replaceable, I think.
Love that. Craig, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Is there anything else that you think and that we should make sure that this community hears and learns from your lessons?
I think the first and most important thing is you got to be guided, each individual, especially in medical, by what gives you joy and pleasure. And my suggestion is really work to develop that sense of curiosity and wonder in the world, and especially being in a medical role. That's really important. And one of the things that we didn't touch on, but I think it's really important, when I worked as a sales rep in a commercial organization, it's about results and a hierarchy of who's the leader, who's the winner, who generated the most. And in medical, it's about the goal and the team. And I don't mean any of that either in a pejorative way, but I think there's a very different quality of mindset. People that go into science and medicine, and particularly in medicine, it's about that carry role and reveling in the success or health of others versus I want to win. And they're both important. And I think I'm not making any sort of value judgment about one is better than the other. It is just a way of how your brain is wired. And so my advice is know that about yourself, and then look for and find that organization that is in tune with that. If the organization was considered a great organization but doesn't align with those values, and you want to stay in a medical role and feel valued, you might want to think a little bit harder about, is that really the right job for you?
Great advice. Well, thank you so much. If people wanted to follow up and get to know you better, can they follow you on LinkedIn or Facebook?
I'm on LinkedIn, and people can email me directly. It's first initial last name at Lexicon or lexpharma.com. But yeah, LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I try to see all the great success of all my friends and colleagues that I've worked with over the years. So again, Scott, I'm really appreciative of you giving me this opportunity, and I hope this might be of some value to others. And if that's the case, then I'm really happy.
I think so. Thank you so much. And everybody, we'll put his information in the show notes. And thank you. And we look forward to talking to you next time.